Well, hello and welcome to episode 46 of The Horrible Influence. It's going to be a space news episode. Not really news, I guess, this week. We're going to be covering something that's been around forever, but that I've taken a little bit of an interest to here in the past couple of weeks. As you've probably noticed already by the lack of a cheerful intro from Tyler, he is still on vacation and will not be back until I go on vacation. So, I'm going to try to do this one solo, but it's okay. I've got a lot of research, which normally would account to a 2 or 3 hour podcast, but without Tyler, it's probably going to wrap up pretty early. Today, we are going to talk about gravity. I wanted to do a twofer talking about gravity and parallel universes, but the massive extent that we've come to with parallel universes has driven that to be its own thing, which kind of recalling back to what I learned in school and what I've kind of picked up along the way. Parallel universes was kind of this fun little theory that you could tag on to gravity, and we'll talk about a little bit on why that's a thing. But you could tag it onto gravity because of the simple fact that because of the Big Bang theory, which is the start of gravity, right? That this should have happened multiple times, and the theories give way to that. Not every scientist is on board with that, and it's some people have even called it hogwash, and it's just not of any substance. But as time goes on, those theories are getting proven more and more true, and with strange anomalies and quantum mechanics progressing, the field of quantum mechanics progressing the way it is, that seems to be, I don't want to say proven, but a more widely accepted theory, especially today and especially within the last year or two. So that's going to probably be the episode for Tyler and I to come back as the Wonder Twins and hammer out a episode on the multiverse. But today, gravity. And yes, I'm talking about that horrible movie. No, I'm not talking about that movie. We're going to talk about the actual gravity, the one that affects everything from the urgency for you to pee and the ability for birds to swallow. There's your first tidbit, little piece of information, little nugget, is if you took a bird into space, it couldn't eat. It would die. We use muscles to swallow. It uses gravity. How about that? Also, astronauts don't have the urge to pee until their bladder's about to explode. So, that's a thing. Our bladder gets a third full, and the weight produced by that, because of gravity, causes the urge to pee. And those are the most important facts of today's episode. We're going to start off with talking about gravity. Newton came up with the formula for gravity in the 1600s, and that was very simple, that mass, all you needed was mass and the amount of space in between the two objects that contained mass, and there was a attraction between them, and every object exerts that attraction on something else. The problem with Newton, and he even wrote this down, is that he left it up to future generations to figure out what that was, because for the life of him he could neither visualize it or find a mathematical property to explain why that force was exerted. So he knew that the sun would pull more gravity than the earth, and the earth would pull more than the moon, but he did not know why. Most people accepted this as just a fact of God until Einstein came along. And Einstein, in the very early 20th century, came up with an equation, which is his most important equation, especially in my eyes. Like, unless you're creating nuclear fusion, E equals mc squared. Like, if you're an atom bomb builder, then you for sure like that one better. But his gravity was G equals 8 pi t. And we won't go into a lot of math on this one. I don't understand a whole lot of it. I kind of know enough to scrape by. The whole point of this was to prove that space-time was essentially a fabric stretched out across eternity, what we perceive to be eternity. And that if you set something on this fabric, that it would cause an indent. It would sag and warp space-time. And this can be visualized in a great way. I love this video. But if you go to YouTube and you type in gravity visualized, and it's AP Bios, which I'll spell it for you because I think when I sound it out, it kind of sounds like an F. APBIOLGHS. Guy looks like a high school teacher. Man, I don't want to say better than all of mine, but this dude definitely visualizes things for his students in a really good way. And what he did was get a giant sheet of Leica, like a giant thing of spandex, basically, and stretched it out fairly large, right? Like, this thing takes up like a giant round, like probably like a small trampoline. Like, not the teeny tiny ones, but definitely not the massive one. Fit in a room. And they show how setting weights in different areas can manipulate the trajectory of rolling marbles across it. Now, the problem with this is that all marbles will eventually fall to that warped section. It's because of loss of energy, right? Like, as long as they're going fast, they would just keep going. But because their momentum slows each time because of gravity, but that doesn't happen in space. There is no drag. There is no friction between the friction that you get between the ball and the Leica, and then the downward pull from Earth's gravity, because that's what we're using there to kind of visualize that is all affecting it. So out in the great fabric of space, you wouldn't have a centralized, at least not one that would have caused that immediate reaction of force. There's no centralized gravity to pull it down, so it would move freely throughout that space and not lose the energy. Now, over a long enough period of time, we can see that, which is why, I guess, given a long enough projection, either Jupiter will either push Neptune out, or it's going to suck it crashing into the sun at some point. But hopefully, mathematically, that won't happen for anyone to see, let alone just us. So now that we've kind of, hopefully, if you have any real setback on what this looks like, you've taken a quick pause here to go watch that video, because it is really good, and it kind of sums everything up to a very easy to handle representation. So we're going to start talking about the fabric of space-time. Now, how did the fabric of space-time get there? I don't know that anyone has a theory for that one yet. The Big Bang Theory shows us how the exertion, the movement of the universe is expanding, which has been seen and proven. We know that it's moving. So the only logical explanation would be that it started, right? You rewind the clock and keep going back 13.5 billion years, and you eventually get to an extremely hot singularity. Now, we're gonna go as far back as that we've been actually studying gravity, and we'll move forward from there through some of the people that are very influential to this. Some of the guys that have come out with the theories that make all this a reality for us, something that we can test true. So Newton, like we said in the 1600s, developed a formula of gravity, showing that every object pulls on every object, and something of greater mass can pull for a longer space of emptiness. Now, Einstein came in the early 20th century with his formulas, and then you had after him, there was a couple smaller incidences, but all of their theories ended up getting thrown out, even though they were proved true later. We'll go for the guys that actually scored the win here, minus this very first one, which is Alexander Friedman. And Alexander Friedman came up with man, I just tanked that one. Alexander Friedman came up with the expanding universe idea, but it was just an idea. He did have the math for it that Einstein told him was wrong and publicly said that it was wrong, but Friedman pretty much hounded him with the information until it was accepted as right, and then Einstein said, well, okay, your math is right, but your idea of physics is completely wrong. I guess Einstein was kind of a dick. He did this a bunch of times. Like, he would come up with this revolutionary idea, and anyone that came up with another one, even if it was just a branch off his, he would immediately tell them that they were wrong. So Alexander Friedman had that idea, but had no way to test it. And then George Gamow came out. George Gamow was a Russian giant of a man who tried to flee Russia with his wife in a canoe by crossing the Black Sea, and he had nothing but brandy and fine chocolate on him. And the reason for this was he thought, okay, if we get captured, we can say we're just out here floating around. And that's what happened. He got captured, but his story held. He said, we were out here and we got caught by a current, and we ended up out here in the middle of this thing. Sorry, take us back to Mother Russia, which they did. He eventually did escape, and he came to America. And Gamow theorized that if the universe is expanding, as Friedman had hypothesized, that there would be residual heat left over in the universe. If a Big Bang went off, like, we can still see the light from that. Like, if we had the power to reach out, we could still see that original thing because it's through time, space and time. So nothing can move faster than the speed of light. That original would still have leftover. So you should be able to see the residual heat from the Big Bang. Gamow had a problem, though. No one believed him. Not only did they not believe him, it wasn't just that they didn't believe him. They also were very busy doing real science. This was at a time when physics was still having. It was a glory time to be a physicist. You were coming out with things that explained everything that was happening here on Earth still. So no one was kind of looking, out into the universe, not doing cosmetology, right? Or cosmetology. They weren't painting people's faces. No, they going out into cosmology. So Gamow was considered a joker, and the reason for that was he had like a paper. I'm sorry if I get the names wrong, but the joke kind of stands. He published a paper and submitted it, and one guy's name was something Alpha or Alphma. I think it was Alphma, and his name was Gamow. So he got with like Alexander Beta, and he got him just to sign on to it, so the paper would read, written by Alphma Beta Gamow. Pretty bad physics joke, but he thought it was funny. So people kind of discredited a lot of what he put out because if it was extreme, they just assumed that he was making some type of joke, a pun. So his work died off. He couldn't get funding to research it. No one would follow up on it. It kind of just faded away. And a few years went by, and Arna Penzias and Robert Wilson came along, and Penzias and Wilson. Oh, sorry, my computer just spazzed out, went black on me. Haha. But I guess normally I move around a little bit more than this. Damn you, Tyler. So, I'm sorry, and let me back up one. Penzias and Wilson did make the discovery, but a few years after Gamma went out, it was actually Robert Dickey and Jim Peebles. Sounds right to me. Robert Dickey and Jim Peebles had the same theory as Gamow, and they tried to find the heat. They were working on it. And then they got a phone call, literal phone call, from Arna Penzias and Robert Wilson. And what they had done right up the road from where these guys were, actually about, I think it was like 15 miles away from them, they were building an antenna that had nothing to do really with what Dickey and Peebles and then before them Gamow had theorized, that an expanding universe should have residual heat. But what they found with this antenna they built was a strange hiss. This hiss they couldn't get rid of. They cleaned the instruments, they recalibrated, they tried over and over and over and over and over again until they came to the conclusion that Dickey, Peebles, and Gamow were all right. That what they were experiencing was the radiation from space, which we all know to be a thing now, but wasn't back then. And that radiation is the leftover heat from the Big Bang. Now, there is a science world fair that you can watch on YouTube from last year. I believe it might have been this year's. But they show the proposed graph of how if this radiation was to follow the same path of an expanding universe, it should follow this wavelength. And they draw it out, and it's a nice big curve, and then it kind of falls off and has a couple bumps. And then the data collected from this matched perfectly, completing Gamow's and the Dickey Peebles completed their work. It was the smoking gun. I mean, and it lays in there perfectly. It almost looks like they took the data and then drew something to match it, but the data was published years before it was discovered. The fact that it laid just right in is why the Big Bang Theory became so popular. The funny thing is that only in my lifetime, in just the past few years, has it kind of come into what I consider acceptance. Maybe that's because I grew up in the South, but we weren't taught it as though there was any proof. It was almost like some people believe this could have happened, but there's nothing to back it up. Well, there's a lot to back it up, actually. The problem was always what caused the eruption, right? Like, why did it, what caused the bang in the Big Bang? Like, once the bang happened, you can measure everything that happens after it, and we can do that with simulations and run back and see that if it happened, heat should disperse at this rate, and it does, and so there's this much residual left over, and there is, and Earth or the universe will be expanding, and it's measurable. So there's no real argument there that it started smaller and is now bigger. I mean, you can measure just what NASA can measure now. We can see that it is expanding. So that's where that ended. They proved the Big Bang Theory as an expansion and movement of our universe, but they could not explain why the initial explosion happened. That initial explosion became theorized by Alan Guth and Andre Linde. Linde and Guth came up with the idea that space fabric can rebound if enough energy is collected, basically the same way that a star will explode. Um, if you pull enough heat and energy, quantum mechanics has uh, this unpredictability to it. Like everything, if you've listened to some of our quantum mechanics stuff, or if you read any of Brian Cox's novels, they quantum mechanics is messy, and things can be this and it can be that at the same time, and it bounces here and it bounces there, and it's very volatile. Now you take that and you compress all of that matter and force and energy, and then that volatility can eventually ignite, and it causes a ripple, a giant ripple in space-time. And the Big Bang would have been one so tremendous that it actually jump-started what we know as the universe. And as all of that material floated out into space and cooled down, you're now spreading out that quantum mechanic kind of jumbled up mess into small pockets that they cause heat, small explosions everywhere. Boop, 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 boop. All just kind of floating throughout the universe. And so these guys kind of continued their math, and they said, okay, if this is true, then we should find small pockets of these in increasing distances from each other, the further away they would go from the start of the universe. And their theory isn't so much a start of the universe as like a center exploding outwards. It's called inflationary cosmology, and they represent it from a start and then a cone protruding outwards. That cone would be your 360 that we see, but it's projected out that way. And they said if you set up an observatory facing towards the start of it, you should be able to measure this. And they wrote a theory that goes along with this. And the exact same thing happened. Once we came along and we were able to test this theory, the graph that they drew, the mathematical kind of frequency of when these pockets would happen, the actual data came in and laid almost perfectly on top of it. It's astonishing to look at. Like it just shouldn't be. Like there's no way it's that good. But this laid right in line, and the high curves were met by segments of data, and the low ones were met by segments, and it just was perfect. So this became the norm. Like this must have been what the Bang and the Big Bang was. That this giant explosion stretched and threw the fabric of space-time outward, away from itself. And as everything kind of settled into place, that momentum is what started projecting the planets and everything around their individual suns, and those individual suns are the greatest segment of volume, and if there's too many around each other, they cause the horrible instances of volatility where there would be obviously no hope for life, but no planet would last long enough. It might form, and this isn't going to happen instantly, but in the global cosmic scheme of things, it's just happening all the time. So this expansion continues to happen today, and we've talked about it before, that we're not just floating in around a stagnant sun, sitting in this pond that is the space-time fabric. We are being hurled through something greater than that. And as we rotate around this three-dimensional or four-dimensional space-time fabric that our sun is warping, that causes us to fall in line. Very interesting thing about doing the experiment with the pieces of spandex, or you can do it with anything that's stretchy, right? This guy does it with Leica, but you can do it with a big thing of spandex. Get your mom's pants and stretch them out over something. Bazinga. Take that, stretch it out, lay a weight in the center, and then throw two sets. And if you go watch that Gravity Visualized, or if you did watch it, you already know what I'm about to say. You take two sets of marbles and you throw them in opposite directions. There is a preferred path, which is why all of our planets rotate around our sun in the same direction. And what you see is very violent at the beginning. which is what we know to be true about the start of our solar system and the entire universe for that matter. And the two directions will smash and bang into each other, and the preferred path prevails. And all of a sudden, you're left with a bunch of destroyed debris and then a handful of planets. So you throw, 20 of them one way and 20 of them the other. Somebody comes out on top. And what you're left over with is, after everything else is eliminated, would be a very small number. So instead of having 40 celestial bodies just floating around your sun in opposite directions, you end up with 8 or 9 massive ones cruising in one direction. Everything else has been taken care of. They've smashed into, absorbed, or obliterated all of the other matter. And now we're left with the preferred path. So theoretically, you could have, and I don't know if I didn't even look at this, but I would assume, have some that run opposite to us. I mean, it's all relative to how you're looking at it. Like, our clockwise rotation is only clockwise if you're looking at it from what we perceive to be the top model. But if you're on the other side of it, So, this this preferred pathway comes around, and then it's so neat to watch this happen. I know it's here on Earth, and they end up failing, but just watching it kind of fall into place really gives you an idea of why this theory works. It's kind of hilarious that it took as long as it did for them to come up with it, right? It seems so simple. But obviously the math would have taken an insane amount longer. But the interesting thing comes in when you take that same piece of fabric and you add 2 large bodies onto it, right? So you have 2 very deep distortions in what would be space-time. And then you get the you can look at what NASA uses as return trajectory. Return trajectory is how we got to the moon and back. The first time it went, it just circled it and then came home. And if you take one of these marbles and you launch it from one, it will follow the loop around, and when it heads back towards us, will break that plane as long as it's given enough momentum, and will roll right back over in our orbit. And now if it had enough propellant, it could just continue in a figure 8 around those 2 bodies if they were equal. That little hump that it has to cross over, on Earth, is a physical barrier, right? Like, it has drag, so when it hits that, it kind of slows down, and then that's why you lose energy. In space, it's not drag. The gravity acts against it, but there's no physical drag, so the energy loss is much less. Now, that little hump is called a Lagrangian point. Or Lagrangian point, I think is actually that's pronounced, but it's I think it's Legrangian. I think I heard it, but I don't know the spelling, so don't quote me on that one. But these points are a point between the planets and the sun that have such a, I guess, a high peak. We got to remember that we're looking with a 3D or 4D model, that the distortion causes its own orbit. So things will just orbit in random places without any body, no celestial body there to orbit around it. This kind of solidifies the theory of a space-time fabric. Because if they weren't distorting anything and gravity was just some magic thing that a planet can produce, there would be no reason for this anomaly to happen. And this is an observable anomaly right here in our own solar system, where an object will just orbit, nothing. It would be interesting to think that maybe one day we find out that those are just some random alien spacecraft sitting out there, massive, just watching Earth, catching little asteroids and bits of dust. But no, what it is, and what we, I guess, have proven to be, all of this stuff is still in theory, but how it mathematically works out is that a Lagrangian points cause these anomalies, and it is between massive entities setting on space-time in such a way that there's almost a neutral point. So it kind of gets pulled by one way and gets pulled by one the other, but not enough to kick it out of that zone. So it just starts to orbit a dead spot instead of orbiting a giant mass of gravity. Um, our solar system's weird. We have a giant. Jupiter is so massive that it's a failed sun. I mean, this thing was just right. It was almost there, and there just wasn't enough left over after our sun kind of beat it to the punch to ignite that this giant gaseous planet was close. I mean, it's only a little bit of space debris away from, in the scheme of things, from igniting and turning into a another little star, which would be detrimental to us. But it is so massive that its gravity messes with everything. Which, is that why we're here? Is that why we are the little blue ball? Are we the planet with life because of Jupiter? Now, given that configuration should have happened again, but it also cuts the likelihood of it happening to such a small anomaly that even though infinity would suggest that everything that can happen has happened and has happened an infinite amount of times before, that somewhere Jupiter got enough gas to spool itself into a sun. So somewhere there's one that was identical to us but has two suns. And likewise, there's another set that it happened exactly how this did. And that Jupiter's out there spinning just as is, and there's another Earth. But because of those very unique circumstances where Jupiter's gravity is so massive that anything that flies in from the Kepler belt that would presumably destroy us, like 99% of it gets sucked up and blocked by this guy. The forces are just so strong around us that we're sitting in this perfect little pocket, and we're not bouncing out, we're not coming in, and we're just hurtling through space. So, theoretically, something's going to get through eventually, and eventually something is going to plow into us. Hopefully, we're at a point which is technically already, I guess, been worked out, that we do have contingency plans, according to Neil deGrasse Tyson, to intercept and divert incoming asteroids. So, I mean, it's there. I don't know how successful we'd be, but let's say it holds off another 100 years. We'd probably be real good at it. If the next large one doesn't come for several thousand years, and let's say nothing happens to us, and we keep progressing, then we might be able to prolong our planet's life. Which, as far as we know, we're the only planet that can do that. We'll kill it with greenhouse gases, but we'll be sure to stop any rock shenanigans from happening. So we've gone over the reason why balls crash into each other on the sheets that we use on Earth to do these gravity experiments. So hopefully that explains why it doesn't happen out there in space, no loss of energy. And we've kind of talked about how gravity works. I know it's been kind of quick. I think that's everything I had. Normally, I would get a little bit of banter where I've gotten something wrong, and Tyler likes to bring that point up, or maybe give me some random thing that I run off on a tangent about. But today I got to be real focused. I didn't like it. I don't like being focused in on this stuff. I like to spew off randomly into why Kim Kardashian's ass has the amount of gravity pull that it has. And technically, you should be able to do Einstein or Newton's equation to figure that out. So I don't know who wants to figure that out, but if you could do that on the Facebook page, that would be dope. Because I'd probably get a T-shirt that showed what the actual mathematical gravitation of her S's. Uh, oh, that makes me happy. Well, ladies and gents, I hope that you got a little bit something out of today. I didn't want to leave you hanging 2 weeks in a row. I know last week I threw something up that was just to mark the boards, but yeah, we're going to hopefully go over this a little bit again on next week's, and then get Tyler back in the studio so we can hash out the multiverse stuff, which it should be fun. And the I guess I never really tied together why the multiverse thing runs with gravity. So the theory is that if the universe, and the way that it was told to me is that the multiverse would be like Swiss cheese, like a giant block of Swiss cheese, and the holes would be different multiverses. But imagine the Swiss cheese as a whole, and then it expanding, and then little pockets of this massive energy that we talked about with those at the very beginning, with the confused little quantum mechanics bits and pieces all jumbled up, and then they explode, and they would create a pocket in that cheese, and the cheese gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then somewhere else another pocket would happen. Now in our pocket, physics are what physics are, and that's why all the data kind of falls right in line with our theories when we prove them. If your theory's right, the data should fall perfectly in line. Now all of our universe should follow those laws of physics, which is very nice for us. If that is true, and again, it's just a theory, but if it is true, that means we could just keep jamming out mathematical equations to show us exactly how the universe is expanding and how long it'll take us to get here and what the probability of life is on other planets, or which planets would be the ones to aim for, to explore, to watch, and what sections of space we should be aiming the telescopes at. We can figure all of this out because we know that not just our solar system, but our entire universe should follow that set of physics. On that point, just because our universe has to match our physics doesn't mean that another universe that popped up in this multiverse does. It could have its own set. E might not equal MC square. You might end up with something completely different. You would think that gravity would still work the same way depending on what the large block of cheese is, right? But we don't know that. We don't know what the physics of another universe would be, and it's almost impossible for us. We keep thinking large and large, but we figured out so little about what just around us. We can never hope to, definitely not in our lifetimes, and it doesn't seem like ever, as long as our physics hold true, ever reach the other side of our own universe, or even go back to the beginning. Like, we can't find the center. We're not going to No Man's Sky this thing. So until we find a way to warp space-time on our own, which would be the idea of like a gravity drive, something like that, to really bend and warp space-time around us, but then you're going to leave Earth behind. And I think that's kind of the issue that we're going to run into, is that even if we figure out the technology to propel one group of people to a distant, faraway place, we won't be here when they come back. There's a probability the planet won't be here. They could go on a journey, and they do it very an acute way in Interstellar, where they go to the planet and they come back and like, oh, it warped space-time, and now you guys have been here for 30 years. I mean, we could jump to the Andromeda system. Maybe that's not so far that it's not more than 20 or 30 years or whatever, depending on what the warpage gains us. But if we go, say we aim for the middle, whatever we perceive that to be, and we are able to warp space-time enough to achieve that, when they came, it could be 1 billion years. I mean, I'm sure there's a way to start working the math for that, but there's always been a problem with humanity creating anything that they won't be able to use themselves. Like, I don't know of any instance where someone will work on a project that takes their entire life, but it's very hard to convince somebody to work an entire lifetime to achieve 1/10 of a project. So until we evolve past that need or extend life indefinitely, which would be dope, I'd take that. We're not going to figure out a way to expand the reach of humanity. Because if we could go that far, then either the people that create it won't be here to ever see it, and the chance of them getting there and being like, "Hey, this is where Earth is," and they're like, "Oh, okay. Well, our technology can get you back there in half the time," and they get, and it's like, "Awesome, we made it all the way back to nothing," because that still took 12,000 years or whatever it was. So, I'd like to see if there is any math done on that, like what it would take, what the energy output would be to warp space time enough to, or if it's even possible. Not, we know it's not possible now, but theoretically possible to warp space time enough to make a jump across the universe and back. Like, would you need the power of the sun? Would you need the power of 1,000 suns? Like, what would be the gravitational equivalent to that? Well, I think with that, I'm going to leave you guys. We blabbed on here for just over 40 minutes, so I think I'll take it. It's a good short, sweet podcast on gravity. As always, go check us out at horribleinfluence.podbean.com. Shout out to all of the new subscribers that we got. We get, seems like 10 or 20 a day now. I'm real stoked with how everything's going. I hope you like the channel. We also would invite you to go over to our Facebook page at horribleinfluence.facebook.com. And as always, you can email me at horribleinfluence on Gmail or on Twitter, which is some shitty way to spell horrible influence. Hell, we're even on Instagram now, so we're going to start throwing up sweet memes to kind of tide you over in between episodes. Well, thanks for tuning in, and let's talk to you next week.